Hey guys, it is Nicole Lorraine and it is time for another Q&A. The last one, if you haven't checked it out already, it's all about nutrition. This is going to go on to a little bit more into the workout and exercise side of things. What I've had to do is because this is when things start to get, I think, a little bit more confusing. So I've written things down to keep my train of thought because there's a lot of different aspects and they kind of trail off into different areas and I don't really want to get that sidetracked. Question number one, how much do you need to work out per week to maintain muscle rather than build it? A very good question, a somewhat very complicated question, which is annoying because that's probably not what people want to hear. And the second question is the best types of workout for weight loss. So, I'm going to start off with question number one, the most confusing one I would say first. So this one is going to be a good one because I'm going to end up answering loads of different types of questions that people might have just with this one question. This is going to be a long one, guys. I'll try and keep it as simplistic as possible, but there will be aspects that I kind of either don't explain very well or maybe miss out. I've tried to write it all down, so I do apologise if I don't quite explain something properly, but if that's the case, give me a message. I'll try and explain it a little bit better for you. How to maintain muscle mass rather than build muscle mass. It's not really something that people want. It's rather something somewhat rare that I get as a client base or as a goal for people in general. But I know that there are some people that don't really want to increase their muscle mass and that's fine. But it is very goal dependent. So there's a lot of confusion about certain words and what they actually mean. One of which is the word tone. And when someone says, I want to tone something, I want to get a little bit more toned, my goal is toning. I think that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding as to what the definition of toning is. When you want to tone something, the look that you're going for is effectively something that is leaner, whichever area you're fancying to go for, or somewhere that you can see more muscle definition. A lot of the time people go down the route of, oh, if I need more muscle definition, that means that I need more muscle. This isn't necessarily the case. Even if you have a lot of muscle, if you've got this much muscle, which is fine, but this much fat, even if you go to this much muscle and still have this much fat, you're still not going to see it. So what do we need to do? We need to try and drop fat. As we know, this, hopefully, cannot be done by target spotting certain areas, which is super annoying and I don't think I would be in a job if that was the case. When you drop fat, it can go from anywhere over the body. Unfortunately, it makes it a little bit harder to target certain areas that you in particular think you have more fat in comparison to others. If you're wanting to maintain muscle, which is what this question was for, it also depends if you want to keep the same level of fat or if you want to drop fat. For this, it's all about being in a calorie deficit. So much to people's dismay, this is not really got all to do with training, and it does come into that nutrition side of things as well. When people say that nutrition is more important than the exercise is 1000% true in my personal opinion. So what you would need to maintain muscle and drop fat at the same time is a calorie deficit. There's different ways that you can do this. In terms of training, women drop fat from their body better when they weight train. There's a lot of research surrounding this, which obviously then kind of makes it a bit more difficult when you don't want to build muscle. Then comes the factor of if you have more muscle, physical muscle mass in your body, on your skeleton, you've got more potential to burn more calories and therefore more fat. So that's where it gets a little bit confusing with this question, because if you are female and if you want the best out of the situation, the most efficient way to drop fat is from weight training, but usually through weight training, it more than likely you are going to build some muscle. However, you can still train to a certain level without building and growing muscles. This is obviously where there's a little bit more indecisive data. If you are working within strength training, so these are the people that are bodybuilders, powerlifters, physique competitors, anyone that wants to be really big, you would kind of work within a much higher percentage of your 1 rep max range. So this is kind of between like a 80% plus, I would kind of say. So you're looking at rep ranges where your set is 1 to 5 reps. This is obviously not the same as if you wanted hypertrophy. So hypertrophy, not strength, is about muscle growth. This, again, there's kind of some crossovers. It vastly depends on the person, how their muscles develop, also their enjoyment in training. Rep range wise, you would want to be in a higher rep range to maintain muscle than if you were to build it. So I would usually say between 10 reps and 20 reps. This can obviously differ dependent on the exercise at the same time. However, I feel like there's going to be a lot of howevers. This isn't obviously the only way that you can train and drop fat. It is just simply a more efficient way for people, for women more so than men, but still men, to drop fat. You can obviously drop fat via cardio if you like cardio. It's not as popular as other forms of training, but I personally really like cardio. I know a few of my clients really like cardio at the same time. This is where it gets a little bit more difficult in terms of knowing what you're doing. So it's a lot harder, even if you have a really good Fitbit, if you have a heart rate monitor, to actually 100% determine how many calories you are burning. It is dependent obviously on what you put in as data, so your height, weight, age, gender, all that kind of stuff. However, it obviously is dependent on things like the environment that you're in, like the weather. A couple of weeks ago when it was scorching hot, you would have burned more calories training out in that weather than you would if you were training today when it's been cold and dreary and a little bit rainy. Because your heart rate's going to be higher, because it's boiling hot. Even if you have a super good tracker, they obviously, I don't think they take into account the weather and the humidity, and obviously you might be training a little bit different if you've had a rubbish night's sleep the day before. So there's a lot of things that can kind of contribute that is very difficult to track. Yes, you can kind of wing it and hope for the best, which for some people that might work, that's great. It's not very common, but this is where the nutrition comes into it. When you eat 100 calories, you have eaten 100 calories. There's no difference if you've weighed it out properly. If we look at it from a whole day of calories, if your maintenance is 1700 calories, if you eat 1700, you've eaten 1700. You know that is what you have eaten. But you might go on the exact same run 3 times in 1 week and burn 3 completely different values, but you would presume it's the same because you've run the same, you've done the same-ish time. With nutrition, it is obviously easier to track. If you wanted to maintain muscle mass, usually you'd keep yourself within your maintenance calories. So this is as per your BMR, which if you don't know what BMR is, this was explained in my nutrition video on the episode 1 of my Q&As. So if you want to give that a look, you can obviously go and find that on my channel. If you wanted to lose fat whilst maintaining the same amount of muscle, you would have to burn 3,500 calories in 1 week to burn 1 pound of fat in said week. This means that you would have to burn 500 calories every single day, which I would say is for someone, I'll base it on mine because obviously that's more accurate of a data. So someone who is 5'6", about 150 pounds roughly, who is 23, I would go on a 3-mile run for 30 minutes and burn approximately 400 to 500 calories. So you would have to be doing, again, it's different if you weigh more, weigh less, all that kind of thing, but for Pete's sake, I would personally have to do a 3-mile run every single day, which is obviously quite a lot for me to do in terms of joints, quite a lot for me to do in terms of recovery. Some people can do that, that's fine, but if I just suddenly went to go and do that, I would find it very difficult. Some days you might not have the motivation to do anything, you want a lazy day, you've lost 500 calories right there. Are you going to make it up on the other days? I don't know, it depends. There's too much leeway there. If you were to burn that 500 calories, that's eating at maintenance. But you might have actually had a cheeky Domino's on a Saturday and you've accidentally eaten 500 calories over your maintenance. So now you're going to have to burn 1,000 calories in one day, which I really don't advise at all unless you want to, like, if you're not used to doing that level, that's really hard. For some people, if you are already someone that does, if you're an athlete already, that's pittance. But for the average person, that's quite high. To then do it after 6 days of burning 500 calories, I think it's a bit mad. You can obviously take into account that weight training still needs to be carried out. This should be similar to what you were doing when you were building that muscle mass. So for example, if you were doing 3 sessions a week with 5 exercises, 3 sets of each, you've obviously been progressing throughout the weeks to try and progress the muscle strength, progress the muscle growth. You obviously kind of want to get to the point where, oh, I'm happy with how much muscle I have, I'm going to keep it there. You will have to then continuously do that level of intensity of training to maintain the muscle and you don't drop it. I think another thing that gets confused is strength in a muscle and growth of a muscle. You'd think obviously they go hand in hand, but you can still increase the strength of the muscle to a certain point before you can drastically see differences in the size. So if you want to still strengthen and keep progressing, but you don't want to grow in size, that's essentially, I don't really think that's possible, to be honest. Might have to be a little bit of an evaluation there. I just want to reiterate how important nutrition is. So my next point is about rather than worrying about building more muscle, is making sure that you don't lose it if you want to maintain what you've gained. So this, again, is all about nutrition, but also protein. Yes, it's that devil of a word. Protein, 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 protein. If you drop in protein, your muscle mass is going to drop. If you also eat too low in your calories, you're going to be using and losing the muscle that you've gained because you're not maintaining yourself. So if you're eating less than that 1700, if that is your maintenance level, it's highly likely, if you're not on the weight training high up and intensity is not high, if you're staying with the same amount of reps and sets that we said about before, you're going to lose muscle. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're wanting to tone, i.e. have muscles become more apparent but not necessarily bigger in size, this all comes from fat loss, purely fat loss, i.e. a calorie deficit. What does that mean? It means eating under your maintenance level. So eating under your BMR. For me, if my BMR is 1700, if I ate 1200, which personally I think is a little bit low, I, in theory, would lose 1 pound of body fat in a week, but that is making sure that I am maintaining my weight training. So it all gets very confusing. I understand that. It's very weird, but this is why some people book a PT and get a PT, because then it means that all of the confusing stuff is down to me and I can just work out all of the math, all of the science, all of the anatomy, all of that. You just do what is said effectively. So this is where you have to kind of appreciate the amount of tiny precise details that go into trying to perfect a diet that is sustainable, a diet that is somewhat enjoyable, but you also have to realise it's not going to be enjoyable all the time. It is, I personally think, impossible to have literally every single day you enjoy being on said diet, whether that's a calorie deficit, a calorie surplus, maintenance, the training plan. It's going to be hard one day at some point. You can obviously take time off, that's fine. One day is not going to do anything. If it's just one day that you're struggling with, fine. But you can't expect to live your full life in the way that you were if you want to make changes. If you want to change something physically, you need to change something mentally for that to happen. That change is very difficult. I'm not gonna lie to you, it is very difficult. I have seen people, clients, family, friends struggle with that change. I've struggled with it myself. And it's getting to the point where you can enjoy the foods and you realise and understand that you can have the foods that you want, but you really just need to have some willpower in certain situations. You need to learn what is best for you, not what other people are doing. If you have a PT, work with that PT to make them understand, and you can work together to figure out the best timing pattern for your meals, the best portion sizes, the best way to get to where you're enjoying it, but it's also challenging you at the same time. For example, because I know a lot of my clients like it when I give them my own struggles, it kind of makes it a little bit more relatable for them. Personal trainers are by no means perfect. I know that I have a long way to go mentally as well as physically as to where I want to be with goals. However, I know that I much prefer eating later on at night. Some don't, some find that affects their sleeping pattern. Personally for me, I don't think it does. I don't find it that it does. I'm much more of a grazer. After my tea, I like to have some sweet snacks. That is what satisfies my brain after my dinner, my evening meal. So I would much prefer to have a light breakfast that is still high in protein, a lunch that's again quite light but still high in protein, and have several snacks throughout the day to then have a big meal in the evening and then some more snacks afterwards. That's just the way that I prefer to eat. As long as I can get my protein in and I can get my calories in, which I do, then it's fine. That's what works for me. However, there are some people that won't work for, because they might start snacking and then not be able to stop. That's where the willpower comes into it. That's when you go, okay, I kind of want that, but I also want to drop fat and look better in said bikini or pair of jeans, better at doing the sport that you're doing. That's what is going to make that difference, when you need to just make that little switch and go, okay, what do I actually want more? To eat that extra slice of cake, which everyone wants to, but it's having the ability to go, but I want to be happier in myself and have more self-confidence, more self-esteem, because in the end of the day, that's what people are doing it for. There's some insecurity that you're wanting to change. If it's performance-based, that's fine. You've obviously got that little bit more of a drive for it. You're just going to find your motivator. This brings us on a little bit nicely onto question number 2. Best type of workout for weight loss. What I would like to point out, which I did touch on in my first episode of the nutrition Q&A, but I want to carry on again. After that Q&A, I did have someone, which was fabulous, message me and say that they watched the Q&A and that they had a few questions, and that they had essentially only been using the scales as their measurement process to see how they've been doing. I obviously asked if there was any other ways that they've been tracking it, whether it's with pictures or measurements, which I do with my clients and implement, because I have found that there's some people, which is again fine, there is some people that don't drop physical scale weight, but they will drop in size, they will drop their measurements, they'll drop in clothing sizes, they'll drop in picture visually. And I asked the question, which would you prefer, for the scale weight to tell you that you have dropped 1 stone, but you look exactly the same, your clothes fit exactly the same, you've got the same measurements, everything looks the same, but the scale weight is obviously down? Or option number 2, for you to look physically smaller, for you to have more definition, if that's what you're wanting to go for your clothes to be big, so you have to buy smaller sizes, but the scale weight stays exactly the same. Most people will always go for option number 2 and don't realise that they don't correlate. Like, a lot of people don't change that much or at all, or they actually go higher in weight. I have several clients that are heavier now than they were when they started, but they're so much smaller. Their stomach's flatter. Like, that's toward their goal. This is where it gets mentally confusing because society is always telling you lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. But the weight doesn't matter. It's the visual appearance that usually people want to change. Visual change over scale weight 1000% of the time. Use pictures, use measurements, utilize visuals rather than the scales, because at the end of the day you're wanting to visually look different. Am I right or am I right? There we go. That's why I always say fat loss rather than weight loss, but weight loss is a more commandeered term for it. We've already touched upon the best research training for fat loss for females in women. So weight training is obviously proved to be one of the best types of training for fat loss. If you're wanting to do cardio, which is perfectly fine, this obviously is more kind of based towards your actual fitness levels, your lung capacity, your ability to run up the stairs without passing out at the top, which we all do, let's be real. But if you use that to put you into a calorie deficit, you can obviously do that as well. Weight loss, fat loss is all about being in that calorie deficit. This has nothing to do with carbs, it's got nothing to do with fats, it's got nothing to do with protein even. But fat loss specifically is about being in a calorie deficit. There are certain parameters around it, which I can go into in a different video because that will be a long video too. But essentially, calorie deficit, deficit of calories, less calories, calorie deficit. Yeah? You can obviously do this in two different ways. One way, like we said before, is to increase your expenditure, which we have already learned that that's quite hard to measure. Or you can reduce your calories under your BMR. That's obviously kind of number one. But focusing it towards actual workouts, yes, weight training is best for females, is also good for males. It's just one of the best for females that's been researched. But this is where something else comes into play. And it's just how much you enjoy doing certain exercises. I myself am not a lover of doing weight training. I find it very difficult to continue my motivation for. I find it very difficult to enjoy, and I don't get the same chemical reaction as I do when I do cardio. However, I do still incorporate it into my week. I just don't make it completely weight training focused. I have a lot of people that love doing HIIT training, so high intensity interval training, whether it's via doing circuits, whether it's through doing Tabata training, however you style it, it's a shorter workout, but it's still, you're putting in a lot of energy. Most people like this because it improves their fitness, doesn't necessarily have anything to do in terms of benefits for fat loss / weight loss. But it obviously it is still going to get you to do those things because you're burning those calories. However, like we've said, the more muscle mass that you have, the more fat potential that you have to burn. So if you want to become leaner, weight training is kind of the way to go. Sometimes it is difficult for people under certain circumstances. So if you have a joint problem, usually people are like, oh, you can't do weight training then. But it's actually quite the opposite. So it's very low impact if you're obviously making sure that you're doing really nice, smooth, compound movements, but you can isolate them to certain exercises at the same time. So if you have a hip problem, but you want to focus on your legs and you're like, oh God, I can't do lunges, I can't do squats, everyone tells me to do squats, what am I supposed to do? You can obviously isolate it to doing just quad focused exercises. It's not going to be as efficient, but there's still ways around it. HIIT training is usually very high impact. You can make it low impact, but usually the exercises that you'll see are things like jumping around, landing, hopping, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more difficult to adapt to, but still possible nonetheless. Again, cardio, usually people go, oh, running. There are obviously other alternatives such as cycling, swimming, etc. But that's kind of the first thing that people go for, so we'll kind of go with the norm. If you do an excessive amount of cardio, this can impede your muscle growth, which we have said before, if it's impeding your muscle growth, you've got less potential to burn the calories, to burn your fat, blah, blah, blah. So to simply answer the question and not ramble on too much, do what you enjoy doing, but if you want the technical answer, weight training is one of the most beneficial ways of training. You can obviously target certain areas to tighten the skin around it. You can drop fat at the same time whilst also building up your strength, which is obviously going to be good for posture. It has a lot of benefits. HIIT training and cardio usually has a little bit more risk with injury, if that's something that you want to think about at the same time. HIIT training is much more difficult usually to keep form and technique on point with. So if that's something that you're worried about, you can obviously stick with weight training. If you are unsure about doing weight training, obviously you can talk to me as a PT or any personal trainer that you know or want to contact. It is all about making sure that you are safe whilst performing those exercises, but they are really beneficial to do at the same time. So find something that you enjoy doing, incorporate a few different things so you don't get bored, and hopefully you'll be able to reach towards your weight loss or fat loss, we should say, targets. And hopefully that answers kind of those two questions. I know it's a bit rambly and very confusing. It might take a few watches of certain areas, but if you think I have missed something out or not really explained very well, let me know, because sometimes I can type explanations a little bit easier than I can describe and say them, hence why I wrote it down this time. But let me know, make a comment down below if there's anything that you want me to focus on even more for a future Q&A. The next one I'm going to be answering is about the best exercises for building a good bum, getting in those booty gains. And the second one is what exercises you can do to burn stomach fat. If you would like to tune in and see those future videos, subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on Instagram at Nicole Lorraine B. You can find all those updates. You can also find my business Facebook page at just NB Fitness and Therapy. And hopefully I've answered some queries and questions and misconceptions that you might have had, and I will see you in the next one.